approaching you, the giant head of life, ungoverned by mind or soul, subconscious of us.
Good morning. So we're reading in Book 7, the Book of Yoga, Canto 3, the entry into the inner countries. And we've come to page 490, line 76. So, just reviewing back a little bit, Narad, the heavenly sage, has revealed that Satyavan, whom Savitri has chosen to be her mate, her husband, is fated to die in just 1 year. And despite her mother's pleadings, Savitri stands by her choice of Satyavan. And now she's gone back to the forest hermitage where he lives and is living with him there. And she's carrying this foreknowledge of his impending death in 1 year exactly, and feeling the grief of that. And one night, as she lay awake while Satyavan is sleeping, and she's watching over him, and this voice comes to her and tells her, why you nurse this grief. You must go and find your soul. Go within, enter into the silence of a deep trance, and find your soul and conquer death. And now Savitri is turning within, entering into her inner being, searching for her inmost soul at the very center of her being. But as she does, she has to go through various layers of this inner consciousness. And first, she goes into this kind of subconscious, confusing realm of consciousness. And it's a chaotic kind of things with elemental entities swirling around and dark and chaotic forces swirling around. And she continues inward, deeper, and she comes into a kind of a clearer realm of the consciousness, of the inner consciousness. And that's where we have left off on page 490, line 76. And can we kind of go over here this time and start here with Paula after a long time? She's back. Yeah. So you begin. At last.
At last she broke into a form of things, a start of finiteness, a world of sense. But all was still confused, nothing self-found. Soul was not there, but only cries of life. A thronged and clamorous air environed her. A horde of sounds defied significance, a dissonant clash of cries and contrary calls. A mob of visions broke across the sight, a jostled sequence lacking sense and sweet. Feelings pushed through a packed and burdened heart, each forced its separate, inconsequent way, but cared for nothing but its ego's drive. A rally without key of common will, thought stared at thought and pulled at the taut brain as if to pluck the reason from its seat and cast its corpse into life's wayside drain. So might forgotten lie in nature's mud, abandoned, the slain sentinel of the soul.
Thank you. Let's pause there. So we see that this inner consciousness holds within itself all the hierarchy of the levels of consciousness, from the disordered, subconscious levels to the more passionate, vehement, powerful, vital forces, to the mind's clarities, both its kind of narrow thinking, but also its greater, wider views and reflections of truth and reality, and up into the higher spiritual consciousness, into the infinities of self-vision, and deeper into the soul, into the essence. I wanted to just read a brief passage from earlier that kind of sets this, what I have just said, in a kind of more beautiful way. It says, "The immaculate, divine, all-wonderful casts into the argent purity of his soul, his splendor and his greatness, and the light of self-creation in time's infinity, as into a sublimely mirroring glass. Man in the world's life works out the dreams of God, but all is there, even God's opposites. He is a little front of nature's works, a thinking outline of a cryptic force. All she reveals in him that is in her. Her glories walk in him, and her darknesses." So we see that within man's consciousness, all the possibilities, all the things of God are there within us. And in Savitri's sojourn through the inner consciousness as she approaches her soul, she's encountering all these different realms of being that are there housed within us. And here she's come into this still confusing realm of the consciousness where feelings and thoughts are each going their own way, pulling for their own self, not caring about their agreement or their harmony with any of the other forces or thoughts, each just seeking its own fulfillment. So it becomes a big clash of forces and ideas. And here, yes, Danny?
But all was still confused, nothing found, self-found. This is so interesting because it shows, there is a lot of information stored coming to us. But we do not self-find.
Yeah, nothing is in its place. See, it doesn't find its place in the whole. It's just seeking its own fulfillment, irregardless of everything else. But that it cannot find its true self or being if it's ignoring all the rest of existence around it. It has to find its harmony in the whole. The whole is the self. It's not that individual aspect. But here, even this confusion in this inner realm of the consciousness can threaten the reason. That the reason is a kind of an ordering principle that tries to put things in order, in harmony with everything else. It may do this inadequately because it lacks the full knowledge, the true knowledge of the whole. But it does its best to kind of put things in order and in their place. But here, these forces can threaten to throw out this ego or this reason altogether, as if to pluck the reason from its seat and cast its corpse into life's wayside drain. So might forgotten lie in nature's mud, abandoned, the slain sentinel of the soul. A sentinel is like a guard or sentry of the soul. The reason is like that. So these vital forces or these subconscious forces can threaten to throw off reason altogether and just take control of everything. And then there is just this confusion and clash of forces, all seeking their own fulfillment and delight. So let's continue with the next person, read. Would you like to read?
What line, where are we?
I don't know the line number. So could life's power.
Okay. So could life's power shake from its mind's rule. Nature renounced the spirit's government.
and the bare elemental energies make of the sense a glory of boundless joy, a splendor of ecstatic anarchy, a revel mighty and mad of utter bliss. This was the sense's instinct, void of soul, or when the soul sleeps, hidden, void of power. But now the vital Godhead wakes within and lifts the life with the supernal touch. But how shall come the glory and the flame if mind is cast away into the abyss? For body without mind has not the light, the rapture of spirit sense, the joy of life. All then becomes subconscious, tenebrous. Inconscience puts its seal on nature's page, or else a mad disorder whirls the brain, posting along a ravaged nature's roads, a chaos of disordered impulses, in which no light can come, no joy, no peace. This state now threatened, this she pushed from her.
Thank you. Let's pause there. Just wait a second. We'll wait. So there's two things we should distinguish here. And one is that Savitri is going into a meditation, into a kind of a trance, and she's experiencing this kind of state within her, this confusion, this chaos of forces that's threatening to kind of push out her reason, her ordering ability. And the second thing is that these things also play out outwardly in the life of mankind. So we can recognize, these things more easily in the outer world, where there may be this clash of forces, subconscious kind of forces, egoistic, just concerned with their own satisfaction, fulfillment, whatever, pleasure, power, irregardless of everything else, irregardless of any reason or thought or common sense. So we see a lot of this playing out in the world, but she's experiencing this within her as well. Okay, so we can distinguish between the soul and nature. There is this divine element within us which reflects God, which reflects the divine. And then there is this outer nature, which is its means of expression, the soul's way of expression. So it uses mind and life and the body, physical nature, as its way to express itself. And here, but nature has this great power of its own. And in the life of humanity, in the life of the ignorance in which we dwell, we're not conscious normally of our soul, of this divine element within us. We live in the nature. We live in the mind. We live in the vital. We live in the body. And we're hardly conscious of the soul within, which is actually its government, its ruler. But because we're divided in our consciousness from that soul within us, it goes its own way. The nature seeks its own way. It slowly evolves under the pressure of the soul within. But it moves ahead through this evolution ignorantly and egoistically. And so, in that confusion of ignorance, it can even consciously push aside the soul or the reason in its confusion, in its ignorance. So that's what's happening to her as she enters into these inner realms. These things are threatening to push aside these higher possibilities of her consciousness. But this state now threatened, this she pushed from her. She pushed away this confusion which is trying to overwhelm the light of reason or the soul. Helmut?
As if in a long, endless, tossing street, one driven mit a trampling, hurrying crowd, hour after hour, she trod without release, holding by her will the senseless mute at bay. Out of the dreadful press, she dragged her will and fixed her thought upon the Saviour name. Then all grew still and empty. She was free. A large deliverance came, a vast calm space. A while she moved through a blank tranquility of naked light from an invisible sun, a void that was a bodiless happiness, a blissful vacuum of nameless peace. But now a mightier danger's front drew near. The press of bodily mind, the inconscious brood of aimless thought and will had fallen from her. Approaching loomed the giant head of life, ungoverned by mind or soul, subconscious, vast. It tossed all power into a single drive. It made its power a might of dangerous seas.
Thank you. Let's pause. We're on page 491. So we see here a transition in her sojourn through the inner consciousness. He describes what she has been going through as the press of bodily mind, the inconscience brood of aimless thought and will had fallen from her. So now she's released from this. She enters into a calm, into a silence. A large deliverance came, a vast, calm space. A while she moved through a blank tranquility of naked light from an invisible sun. A void that was a bodiless happiness, a blissful vacuum of nameless peace. So this silences and quiets down this confusion of this subconscious realm that she's been going through. But now she faces an even greater danger. The force of life is approaching. Approaching loomed a giant head of life, ungoverned by mind or soul, subconscious, vast. It tossed all power into a single drive. It made its power a might of dangerous seas. So she's entering into this vital part of the consciousness. Okay, Margaret.
Into the stillness of her silent self, into the wideness of its muse of space, a spade, a torrent of the speed of life, broke like a windlass driven mob of waves, raising a pale floor of summer sand. It rounds its banks, a mountain of climbing waves. Enormous was his vast and passionate voice. It cried to her listening spirit as it ran, demanding God's submission to chainless force. a deaf force calling to a status dump. A thousand voices in a muted vast, it claimed the heart's support, for its clutch at joy, for its need to act the witness soul's consent, for its lust of power, her neutral being's seal. Into the wideness of her watching self, it brought a grandiose gust of the breath of life. Its torrent carried the world's hopes and fears, all lives, all nature's dissatisfied hungry cry, and the longing all eternity cannot fill.
Thank you. Let's pause. Certainly. Up here. There's something interesting here in that she had entered into this silence, this tranquility and calm, and now she sees this force of life approaching, and yet she's kind of a witness of that. She's able to stand back from it, though it's calling her to submit to this force, to consent, to enter into it. It cried to her listening spirit as it ran, demanding God's submission to chainless force. It claimed the heart's support for its clutch at joy, for its need to act, the witness soul's consent, for its lust of power, her neutral being's seal. Into the wideness of her watching self, it brought a grandiose gust of the breath of life. And then we see how powerful this is. Its torrent carried the world's hopes and fears, all life's, all nature's dissatisfied, hungry cry, and the longing all eternity cannot fill. This is what the life force brings into us and into the world. This longing for satisfaction, for fulfillment, desire at one end, aspiration at a higher end. But we see how important it is for the upliftment of the evolution from inert, inconscient matter towards the spirit. It brings in this gust of life, of movement, of a desire for something greater, some fulfillment. It fills all the world, all our life. Hmm. Yeah, the heart represents the emotional level of our being, our love and joy, also our fears, our anger, all of these things. So the emotions have kind of higher possibilities of love and self-giving. But here, these forces of the lower life try to usurp that. Love turning into hate, turning into lust. So all these lower forces try to lower the heart, to consent to its lower propensities. So let's continue, Daniel.
It called to the mountain secrecies of the soul, at the miracle of the never-dying fire. It spoke to some first inexpressible ecstasy, hidden in the creative beat of life. Out of the nether, unseen depth, it tore, its lure and magic of disordered bliss. Its earth light poured, its maze of tangled charm and heady trod of nature's primitive joy. And the fire and mystery of forbidden delight drunk from the world libido's bottomless well. And the honey-sweet poison wine of lust and death, of dream the vintage of glory of life's gods, and felt as celestial rapture's golden sting. The circles of the infinite of desire and the mystic that made an unrealized world, bitter than the known and closer than the unknown, in which hunt of ever the hounds of mind and life, tempted a deep dissatisfied urge within, to long for the unfulfilled and ever far, and make this life upon a limiting earth a climb to its summits vanished in the void, a search for the glory of the impossible.
Thank you. It's a beautiful description of both the higher possibilities of the life force, what it is leading towards, also its darker propensities and possibilities. It called to the mountain secrecies of the soul and the miracle of the never-dying fire. This never-dying fire reminds us of Agni, which is a power of the soul, this power of aspiration towards the divine. A fire which is there deep within our soul, burning towards fulfillment in the divine. It spoke to some first inexpressible ecstasy. That's what it's ultimately longing for in the fulfillment of the divine, this ecstasy of the divine. The divine is of the nature of absolute bliss. And the soul carries some kind of memory of that towards which it's striving to reunite, to find again that ecstasy. But it's rising out of the subconscious depths, out of the inconscient matter, out of the nether unseen deeps. It tore its lure and magic of disordered bliss into earthlight, poured its maze of tangled charm and heady draught of nature's primitive joy, and the fire and mystery of forbidden delight, drunk from the world libido's bottomless well, and the honey-sweet poison wine of lust and death, but dreamed a vintage of glory of life's gods. It thought of these things in its ignorance and confusion as the highest, as the glory of life, and felt as celestial rapture's golden sting. And the cycles of infinity of desire, these desires are endless, recurrent, and they're very briefly satisfied, but then they recur, because it's never really giving the full satisfaction. It's not giving the true satisfaction of this inexpressible ecstasy which the life force is ultimately searching for. And the mystique that made an unrealized world. Mystique is like an aura of mystery surrounding something. This aura of mystery and delight that made an unrealized world. Our world is still unrealized. It hasn't fulfilled itself. It's still seeking its realization, its fulfillment, its completion. And in this world, in which hunt forever the hounds of mind and life, the hounds seeking for this fulfillment, tempted a deep dissatisfied urge within to long for the unfulfilled and ever far, and make this life upon a limiting earth a climb towards summits vanishing in the void, a search for the glory of the impossible. That's where this life force is leading us. Tineke.
It dreamed of that which never has been known. It grasped at that which never has been won. It changed into an Elysian memory, the charms that flee from the heart's soon lost delight. It dared the force that slays, the joys that hurt, the imaged shape of unaccomplished things, and the summons to a Circean transmuting dance, and passion's tendency of the courts of love, and the wild beast ramp and romp with beauty and life. It brought its cry and search of opposite powers, its moments of the touch of luminous plains, its flame ascensions and sky-pitched vast attempts, its fiery towers of dream built on the winds, its sinking towards the darkness and the abyss, its honey of tenderness, its sharp wine of hate, its changes of sun and cloud, of laughter and tears, its bottomless danger pits and swallowing gulfs, its fear and joy and ecstasy and despair, its occult wizardries, its simple lines, and great communions and uplifting moves, its faith in heaven, its intercourse with hell.
Thank you. So again, Sri Aurobindo is describing the light and the dark aspects of this life force. And it makes us think perhaps of our own aspirations towards the divine. It dreamed of that which never has been known. It grasped at that which never has been won. It chased into an Elysian memory the charms that flee from the heart's soon lost delight. So it's seeking for these heights. And even though it's dissatisfied continually, the heart's soon lost delight It continues in this aspiration, and it can never really cease until it's found it. But in the meantime, in this search, it encounters all this mixture, and it faces all of that, all of those dangers, all of those difficulties. It goes through in its search, in its continual search that can never end until it finds its fulfillment. It dared the force that slays, the joys that hurt, the image shape of unaccomplished things, and the summons to a Circean transmuting dance, and passion's tendency of the courts of love, and the wild beasts ramp and romp with beauty and life. Yeah, for this, I'm going to refer to Shraddhavan's explanation, which is quite nice. Okay, first, the word Circean comes from the name of the enchantress Circe, who appears in the story of Odysseus or Ulysses in the old Greek epic, the Odyssey. The hero, Odysseus, and his companions are trying to return to their home on the island of Ithaca, on the west coast of Greece, after the War of Troy. But the god of the sea is angry with them, and every time they get near their island, he calls up a storm and drives them away to somewhere else. So they have many adventures over the course of their 14 years of traveling. One of these relates to how they reach an island which seems to be deserted. There is no one to be seen, no village or town, no boats or people on the beach. Odysseus sends some of the sailors to go and see what they can find, but they do not come back. He sends some more, but they too do not return. And finally, he himself goes to look for them. In the center of the island, he finds an open space where a table is laid with all kinds of wonderful food and things to drink. There is music in the air and lovely fragrances. He realizes that his sailors have found this place and have greedily devoured all the food they could eat, and that they have all been turned into pigs. This is the island of the enchantress Circe, and these are the delights that she offers you. They turn you into an animal. A Circean transmuting dance is alluring and delightful, but it turns you into an animal. The life force also dares another kind of adventure. Passion's tendency of the courts of love. There was a time in the Middle Ages in Europe when the aristocracy conceived the idea of the courts of love, which produced a lot of poetry also. The courtly love of the knight for his lady was supposed to be always an ideal, pure and selfless, platonic love, which did not involve any sexual indulgence. The lady was supposed to be an object of worship, and all the men around would only wish to serve and follow her. If passion came into these courts of love, then of course it all becomes much more exciting, but it loses that ideal of purity and refinement. Another thing which the life force urges is the wild beasts ramp and romp. When lions or tigers fight, they are ramping or on the rampage in a raging, violent state. But romping is the energetic play fighting of children or young animals. The life urge enjoys indulging in all these various forms of delight. So we see this life force. It brought its cry and surge of opposite powers, its moments of the touch of luminous planes, its flame ascensions, and sky-pitched vast attempts, its fiery towers of dream built on the winds, its sinkings towards the darkness and the abyss, its honey of tenderness, its sharp wine of hate, its changes of sun and cloud, of laughter and tears, its bottomless danger pits and swallowing gulfs, its fear and joy and ecstasy and despair, its occult wizardries, its simple lines, and great communions and uplifting moves, its faith in heaven, its intercourse with hell. It brings all the God's possibilities are there within us, and she's encountering them. Next, Jean.
These powers were not blunt with the dead weight of earth. They gave ambrosia's taste and passion's sting. There was an ardor in the gaze of life that saw heaven blue in the gray air of night. The impulses Godward soared on passion's wings. Mind's quick-paced thoughts floated from their high necks. A glowing splendor as of an irised mane. A parure of pure intuition's light. Its flame-foot gallop they could imitate. Mind's voices mimicked inspiration's stress. Its ictus of infallibility. Its speed and lightning heaven leap of the gods. A trenchant blade that shore the nets of doubt. Its sword of discernment seemed almost divine. Yet all that knowledge was a borrowed sun's. The forms that came were not heaven's native birth. And an inner voice could speak the unreal's word. Its puissance dangerous and absolute could mingle poison with the wine of God.
Thank you. I think that in the first lines here that Sri Aurobindo is again reminding us that this concerns Savitri's experience in the inner consciousness, that and not in the, let's say, in the outer world. So in the inner consciousness, she's experiencing all these different states, these different forces and higher possibilities, and all the different ranges of the vital consciousness. She's experiencing directly, and in that realm of the inner consciousness, they're not weighted down by the physical body. In the outer world, we live in a world of matter, and the life forces, although extremely powerful, are still subdued in some respect by the physical body. We can only handle so much vital power before our body gives way, let's say. We can only experience so much ecstasy in the physical body as it's constituted now with its inconscient basis. We can only experience, so much hatred or evil in the physical body. But in this inner realm, these limitations of the physical are not there. In the vital realm itself, this vital realm was created before the material world, in the descent of consciousness from above, from the divine. And so it doesn't have this limitation, this denseness and inertness of the physical. So they were not blunt with the dead weight of earth. They gave ambrosia's taste and poison's sting. There was an ardor in the gaze of life that saw heaven blue in the gray air of night. The impulses Godward soared on passion's wings. Even the aspirations were soaring towards the divine. For us, we feel this aspiration, but it's dulled down so much by the physical. We feel it, it can be there, and sometimes it can be strong and overcome to some extent this limitation of the body, and we feel it in its higher possibilities, but it's always limited. Here, those limitations have fallen away. And then he speaks of the mind and the intuitions. Mind's quick-paced thoughts floated from their high necks. the floating upwards towards the divine, the higher thought, the higher mind, a glowing splendor of an irised mane, a parure of pure intuition's light. This parure means adornment. It's not quite the true intuition. It's an adornment of it. It's kind of something, a decoration over it. Its flame-foot gallop, they could imitate. So again, the mind here is still limited by the vital. It doesn't have the pure intuition. Mind's voices mimicked inspiration's stress. Inspiration is kind of a intuitive word that comes from above. But the mind mimicked this. Its ictus of infallibility. Ictus is a kind of recurring stress that occurs in poetry, for example. So the intuition, the inspiration has this ictus of infallibility. When we read Savitri, this kind of metered stress creates this kind of inevitability of thought. We feel the directness of the truth. But here the mind's voices imitate that. Its speed and lightning heaven leap of the gods. A trenchant blade that shore the nets of doubt. It feels like it can cut through truth and falsehood and clearly see. Its sword of discernment seemed almost divine. Yet all that knowledge was a borrowed son's. The forms that came were not heaven's native births. An inner voice could speak the unreal's word. Its puissance, dangerous and absolute, could mingle poison with the wine of God. So this is what can happen when the mind imitates the higher truth. It's trying to put into form this higher intuition and knowledge and inspiration, but it can introduce falsehood because the mind is still working in the ignorance. It doesn't have that native truth and light within it. So maybe one more.
On these high shining backs falsehood could ride, truth lay with delight in error's passionate arms, gliding downstream in a brisk gilded barge. They edged her ray with a magnificent lie. Here in life's nether realms all contraries meet. Truth stares and does her works with bandaged eyes, and ignorance is wisdom's pattern here. Those galloping hooves in their enthusiast speed could bear to a dangerous intermediate zone where death walks, wearing a robe of deathless life. Or they enter the valley of the wandering gleam, whence captives of victims of the specious ray, souls trapped in that region never can escape. Agents, not masters, they serve life's desires,
toiling forever in the snare of time. Their bodies born out of some nihil's womb, ensnare the spirit in the moment's dreams, then perish vomiting the immortal soul out of matter's belly into the sink of note.
Thank you. I think we see here an interesting possibility that the mind, because it's still ignorant and divided and does not know the truth or the whole of things, can be misguided. It can be misled. So even a very well-intentioned mind can lead to the precipice, can lead to terrible evils, even with good intentions. But also, the mind is always corruptible by the life forces, by these lower life forces. Agents, not masters, they serve life's desires. So the mind can also be usurped for the purposes of these vital forces, for desire, for the satisfaction of desire. The intellect can be used in any different way, right? It can be used for good purposes or bad purposes. But even at its best, it's still fallible. It still can mislead. It can still lead us into the wrong path, into the wrong direction. So we see this playing out in the outer world. But then, towards the end of this part of the passage, Sri Aurobindo describes this realm of the inner consciousness, which he refers to as the intermediate zone. It's a place, a realm where there's confusion and where there's a mixture of light and darkness, where there are hostile beings who can assume forms of light or divinity to lead astray. These galloping hooves in their enthusiast speed could bear to a dangerous intermediate zone. He speaks of this, he writes of this in his letters on yoga and describes this aspect of the inner consciousness, which many people have to pass through, where death walks wearing a robe of deathless life, or they enter the valley of the wandering gleam, whence captives or victims of the specious ray. Specious means apparently true, but actually false. Souls trapped in that region can never escape. Agents, not masters, they serve life's desires, toiling forever in the snare of time. Their bodies torn out of some nihil's wombs ensnare the spirit in the moment's dreams. They then perish, vomiting the immortal soul out of matter's belly into the sink of naught. He's describing the possibility of getting caught into an illusion of the consciousness, which leads one astray into the satisfaction of vital desire, away from the truth, until even the soul is expelled, and only what is left are this toiling endlessly in this vital forces. So we end on that sad note. But these are one of the dangers of yoga, of the inner search.
This is, I can say, this is what I the most adore in Auroville's work, because he talks about regression, he talks about this. You know, in the spiritual literature I met before, it was always, progress, always, just up. This really enjoyed that. Also, it's not like
Yeah, he brings in all the aspects of existence and of the inner possibilities of our being. The dark and the light we've seen. Okay, we have some music. We have a little music and then we'll go.
Approaching noon, the giant head of life, ungoverned by mind or soul, subconscious vast.
Thanks to Sri Aurobindo.